thank you so much for coming to Building for the Future today. We've just had a fantastic experience of listening to wonderful music performed by Chineke, and I hope that really thrilled you. But I now want to pick up the thorny issue of Brexit. I hope you've all got a cup of tea, coffee, or possibly something even stronger, because you are going to need it over the next hour. I am joined this morning with my guests, Ben Papworth and a Patalong, Lyon, Andy Corrigan, who are going to be looking at this issue from lots of different angles. We're going to be hearing personal experience. We're going to be hearing from Andy as to what Viva La Visa can do to help you. And we've got a partnership with his company because we could see just how difficult life was going to be for musicians. But before that, I'm just going to bring you up to date with where we are in relation to Brexit. And it's a bit like War and Peace. When I spoke to the panel last week, I said, I'll just be 5 or 7 minutes. And then when I actually wrote it all down, I realized that it's a bit more like War and Peace. So I'm going to apologize right from the start for how long I'm going to be talking. But that's because we now know much more than we did back in January of this year. And I'm afraid not all of it is good. So hopefully you've got your pens and papers ready to write down where we are now. If you miss anything, go to the ISM website, which is kept up to date with the latest news in relation to Brexit. So just starting with the end of December 2020, whilst perhaps people were thinking about their Christmas presents and New Year and all that kind of stuff, I was actually sitting at home waiting for the trade and cooperation agreement to head into my iPad. And when it did that on the 27th of December, I was a bit like a small child with a Christmas present. I thought, where are those mobility provisions that we have been promised by the government? And I started leafing through the annexes, looking for the mobility provisions in relation to musicians and their instruments. And I could not see anything, which was a bit puzzling because we had been repeatedly reassured by the government not to worry, everything was fine, and they would negotiate provisions which would protect the ability of our musicians to tour to the EU. So that was all a bit of a mystery. So I then got in touch with my staff team, who, even though they were on leave, I thought, well, I might as well bother them. So I emailed 2 of them and said, can you read this agreement and see if I'm missing something? Because I might have done. And they came back and said, no, there is nothing there about musicians. And that really was the start of our campaign to say to the government, what has happened? Where are the provisions that you promised us? And what are you going to do about this mess? And we are still lobbying government literally every day to sort out the mess that we are now facing in relation to touring to the EU. Before Brexit, there was absolutely no problem. People could tour easily to the EU. They didn't need visas, work permits, carnets, musical instrument certificates, and the like. And an awful lot of UK musicians do precisely that because there is simply not enough work in the UK for UK musicians. And also musicians, not surprisingly, like to go and collaborate with other musicians across the world, and Europe is on our doorstep. So there's always been a big trend in musicians working in the EU and earning quite a lot of their income from the EU. So we're now looking at a very, very different world, and we have been inundated with personal testimony from musicians saying just how terrible it is. And I think slightly at the moment it is masked by COVID, because of course there are lots of quarantine regulations in place. But once those are lifted and we start returning to normal, then I think we will see just how bad things are. So I'm just going to look at some of the big nitty-gritty issues. The first issue is visas. Now, people get confused between visas and work permits, so it's important we're really clear from the beginning. A visa is a document which gives the person the right to enter or leave the country or territory for which it was issued. So literally, it's just the ability to get into another country. Once you're there, if you're going to do work, and I'm now talking about the EU, you are going to need some kind of work permit, which allows a person to take up some kind of paid work. And all of those obligations and rights belong to the individual EU member state. Now, the ISM has spent a lot of time ploughing through all the regulations across all the various EU member states, trying to understand the different rules in relation to visas and work permits, because they're unbelievably complicated. Please go to the ISM website where you will see our up-to-date understanding on work permits and visas. Now, we went to the government and said, this is all very complicated. You should sort this out. What about something called a visa waiver agreement? Now, a visa waiver agreement is something that the EU has entered into with places like Tonga, St. Lucia, and Colombia. So Colombian and Tongan musicians are now in a better place to get into the EU than UK musicians, which is bonkers. So at great expense, the ISM instructed a barrister to draft a bespoke visa waiver agreement, because we thought we can't rely on the government doing this. We'll spend our own money and do it. So we drafted a bespoke visa waiver agreement, which has been with the government since January. So there is a solution. The government has it. All they have to do is pick up the phone and agree it with the EU. So far, they have not done that. And we will continue to lobby the government to do it, because there is absolutely no reason why a Tongan musician or a Colombian musician should have more rights than a UK musician going to the EU. Going on to work permits, this is a very complicated situation because it differs from country to country. And then within countries, you sometimes find that it is even devolved to regions. So for instance, where Ed is today, which is Belgium, Belgium has got different regulations depending on which region you're in, which is unbelievably complicated. And work permits cost all kinds of different amounts. So in Denmark and Norway, it costs about 500 euros, whereas in Greece, it costs about 16 euros. So the costs differ depending where you're going. So again, go back to the ISM website and hopefully you'll find the advice there. If the advice is not there, then go through our frontline team and get transferred to Andy Corrigan's team at Viva La Visa, who will offer you free advice for 30 odd minutes to try and sort out your visa and work permit situation, because you can't do it by yourself necessarily. It's unbelievably complicated. So we've been saying to the government with the work permit situation, right, what you now have to do is talk to the most problematic countries, because some are not as difficult as others. The most difficult country, as far as we can tell, is Spain. And we've had lots of terrible stories coming through about Spain. But there are also problems with Italy, Germany, Portugal, etc. So there are different stories coming through from different EU states. So we said to the government, pick up the phone with these different EU states and have a conversation about putting in place some kind of agreement for UK musicians and work permits. About a month ago, Boris Johnson, in front of the liaison committee, said he absolutely knew how desperate this all was, and they were going full steam ahead, sorting out the mess. They know it's a mess. So at the next DCMS touring group meeting that I was attending, we were really excited and thought, well, we're going to hear good news. The news we actually got from the civil servant was, we're absolutely on the case, and we're preparing a landing page on the DCMS website. with guidance. And I have to say, I totally lost it at that point, because that is not what Boris Johnson had said. And frankly, all of that guidance is already on the ISM website, and I've shared it with government. All they have to do is put a link to it. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. So I'm sorry, I get quite frustrated about this. But all they've managed so far is to draft a landing page. And we made our feelings very clear, everybody on that meeting, and said, look, Boris Johnson said you were going to sort out work permits and the visa situation. What are you going to do about it? To which the civil servant said, it's all very complicated. But that's not a good enough excuse as far as we're concerned. So continuing, there are obviously issues around instruments, and that's carnets. Now, carnets are still somewhat unclear because it's taken a long time for the government to work out what the rules and regulations are. But I don't think necessarily member states know what they are on their side of the border. And that really troubles us. So the government said that if you are just carrying your musical instrument, you should be fine going backwards and forwards between EU borders. But we don't think the EU border force people know that. So there is a risk that your instrument could be impounded going across borders, which is why we have said to be super, super cautious and careful. You might want to consider a carnet, which we know is hugely costly, lots of bureaucracy. We have done a deal with the London Chamber of Commerce so you can get a reduced rate for a carnet. We know it's not ideal, and we need some kind of cultural exemption in relation to the transportation of musical instruments, which is what we are arguing for. But at the moment, there is no sign of that whatsoever. If you put your instrument in as freight or your amplifier, then you absolutely are going to need a carnet. So again, go to the ISM website, and if you're an ISM member, you can get a reduced rate carnet. None of this is good. All of this is terrible, costly bureaucracy. Then we come to CITES. Now, CITES is governed by the Department for the Environment, etc., DEFRA, which is very strange. So we have conversations with the Department for DCMS, with the Department for Transport, and then with DEFRA, because DEFRA looks after the importation of endangered species. And you might think, why are musicians falling within this bit of regulation? We didn't used to when we were not outside the EU, but those regulations have now fallen by the wayside because of Brexit. So we're now governed by new regulations, which means that if you are transporting a musical instrument or accessory containing protected materials, such as Brazilian rosewood, ivory, tortoiseshell, you will need to obtain a musical instrument certificate. And you get that from DEFRA. And in order to be checked, your musical instrument has to go through a designated CITES port. It's unbelievably complicated. Again, go to the ISM website where you will see the up-to-date list of CITES designated ports of entry or exit. Now, we have heard that in some places, the place for checking carnets is not the same place as checking CITES musical instrument certificates. So again, if you've got a promoter or an agent, talk to them and find out where you need to be going with your musical instrument if it is covered by these regulations. Now, just to make matters a bit more complicated, Northern Ireland will remain part of the CITES EU zone, meaning that CITES permits will be required to move goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So that is a problem if you're going backwards and forwards between Britain and Northern Ireland, and you've got an endangered species, bit of wood or ivory or whatever in your musical instrument. then you are going to need some kind of musical instrument certificate, and you will need to go to a CITES designated port, which at the moment is Belfast International, Belfast Seaport and Lyon. Again, check our website, just keep checking our website. I'm just going to touch on 3 more because it does, by this stage, you're all probably thinking, I need to go and get a very strong drink, which is cabotage. Now, cabotage is basically the transportation of musicians and crew, possibly not crew if you haven't got crew, and your musical instrument. And again, this was something that used to be covered under EU regulations. We're now outside those EU regulations. And it's not clear at the moment as to whether the new provisions within the Brexit agreement are helpful or whether we fall outside. It is an absolute mess. And at the last meeting with the Department of Transport, they said they didn't actually know what was going to happen to musicians taking their instruments across borders in a splitter van. It might be that they didn't come within the definition personal use, and there could be fines. Nobody seems to know. So I'm afraid with cabotage at the moment, it is just a big muddle because the Department for Transport doesn't seem to know what the trade agreement means. So keep watching our website. Once we have managed to get to the bottom as to what the government has signed up to, hopefully that will be in our guidance notes, but at the moment it's tremendously unclear. The only 2 good bits of news are in relation to social security and healthcare, which seem to be being sorted out in relation to cover for musicians working temporarily in the EU. They will continue to pay social security in the UK only, provided they have the relevant documentation. So that is good news. And it looks as if an alternative document to the EHIC will be decided upon in due course, making healthcare insurance for short-term stays in the EU free in most cases. And in the meantime, existing EHICs are valid until their expiry date. But again, watch our website for up-to-date news in relation to the EHIC. So I think from all of that, you can tell it is massively unclear in relation to the movement of people and the movement of goods, which basically means musical instruments and amplifiers. And we are caught in relation to a range of regulations, carnes, which is to do with customs, CITES, which is to do with endangered species, and cabotage, which is to do with the transportation of people, their musical instruments, and merchandise and amplifiers. I don't think the government quite knew what they were signing up to when they signed the trade and cooperation agreement. So the last 4 months has been really an ongoing dialogue with various government departments where they try and work out what they've signed up to and then tell us. And then we go back and say, well, this isn't very good. Can you do something about it? We have to keep the pressure up on the government so we can get some kind of cultural exemption covering people and their instruments, because currently the system is just not workable from what I'm seeing. But I'm not a musician. I don't have to go and get a musical instrument certificate or a carnet or a work permit or a visa. But on this session, we have musicians who do have to do precisely that. So we're now going to hear from Ben, Anna and Ed about their experiences today. And then we're going to come to Andy to give his views on where we now are. So if we could go to Ben first. So just share your thoughts on what you think is going on.
Carnage is the easiest way to explain what's going on. I think I'll touch upon what I did before Brexit and whatnot. Prior to it, I was very lucky to share a lot of my time between the UK and the EU. Predominantly, I'm a guest lecturer and musical director at the Institute of the Arts Barcelona, just west of Barcelona in Sitges. I shared a lot of my time in Holland, teaching at Experiments, a lot of time performing around Europe. All of this kind of at the drop of a hat. I remember the first time I went to work at Barcelona. I had a job that had just fallen through in China, and in 48 hours I was on the phone with the head of musical theatre at the school at the time, who then contacted me and said, could you come and teach for the rest of the academic year? Within 48 hours I was on a plane, and I was in Barcelona for about 3 months. I did a lot of fly-ons with cruises, performing West End folk and cabaret stars, going from wherever port, dropping in somewhere for a couple of days and then coming back to the UK. Similarly, I also teach at a school called Associated Studios in London, which prides itself on taking a lot of EU students in and getting them into musical theatre and giving them the training that they need to go off into this big, wild, messy world that we now have. Since then, it's all kind of changed. I'm supposed to be in Barcelona right now, teaching some wonderful students, performing 2 shows at the IAB. I was supposed to be there in February, and I went through the whole visa Schengen situation, as there was no real information anywhere for me to attain that I could find. And there was no communication from the consulate or the department where I had to apply for my visa. I was unsuccessful twice. The first time I was told that I was going for over 90 days. I was going for 91 days. So I was not granted my visa to go to Spain. I then couldn't contact the consulate or the visa application centre to get more information on this. That case was now closed. I then had to go and sort out more information. I deemed from my rejection that 91 days I had to go for a shorter period of time. So I did. And I reapplied for the visa again. Everyone was happy, business visa, and I was rejected again, telling me that I had to go and apply for a completely separate visa, a D-type or C-type, to go and work in Spain. Which the checklist alone is the most convoluted, ridiculous thing that I've ever seen. It is easier for me to get a visa for China and for America to go work in there than it is to go work in Spain, when about a year ago I could just hop on a plane, EasyJet, 20 quid, off I went, did my job. That was it. It's insane. What's even weirder is, and I think Deborah touched upon this, COVID, the confusion between COVID and this. I had to go and hand in my documents. I had to be in person. It felt really bizarre that in a world where everyone was terrified to go within 6 feet of someone, I still had to go and physically hand in my documents at this place, have my photo taken, take my mask off indoors twice. There's no communication between the consulate and the visa centre. It's a huge mess. The information isn't there. The consulate's website, Spanish consulate's website, actually has been updated since 2013 for their visas and work permits, which was great. And similarly, trying to get a conversation with the consulate is like pulling teeth. From that, just on a less personal level, we've at the IAB had students stuck in the UK who were turning up at borders and being turned away, whether it was for COVID or for visa reasons, whatever it was, we don't know. It's all too blurred. And similarly, we're now in a position at Associated Students where we're having to call successful candidates up in the EU and tell them, unfortunately, they can't come and train with us anymore because of visa requirements and because we are not a university, but accredited by a university. It's a big mess, and I'm still none the wiser. Deborah's lovely 15 minutes of information, it only touches on the tip of the iceberg of what's underneath that I never thought as a 25-year-old musician I'd really have to look into, compared to my £20 EasyJet flight where I just popped over to Barcelona to play a piano for a little bit for some students and a great time. Can't do that anymore. It's gone.
Oh, this is so terrible, Ben. But thank you for sharing all of that. We will go next to Anna and then on to Ed.
Hi. Yeah, God, Ben, just sounds horrible. I'm really sorry. For me, I think COVID is masking a lot of it, as you said at the beginning, Deborah. It's a lot of my things have been cancelled. Prior to COVID, well over 50% of my work was in the EU, and I don't know if it's ever going to return that way. I've been very lucky that a orchestral recording that I was meant to be doing in Amsterdam, because there was so many visa problems and issues, they've decided that I can do my part in London. But obviously that's not going to happen with every job. They're just going to say, right, well, we've got another soprano around the corner that can do it, or perhaps over the border somewhere on the mainland, and the jobs are going to go there, really. I've been worried quite a lot this week, not to get on my feminist high horse, but that as with a lot of things, it's women that are going to kind of bear a bit more of the brunt of this. When I had my baby, I took her out to all my jobs. I was in France doing an opera 2 months, and I also brought my mum along with me. And from there, we went to Germany and then Italy and then New Zealand and back to France, and just all over the place. And obviously, once it gets past a certain amount of time, that's going to accrue visa costs and all of that kind of thing as well. So I think, as we know, the average musician doesn't actually earn that much, and I think it's just going to be a complete non-starter for a lot of people that have to decide, well, actually with these extra costs, it doesn't justify me taking on that job. And so yeah, I worry. I'm seeing lots of messages from women at the minute. I also co-run a charity to support parents and women in the industry, and we're seeing a lot of sort of panic messages about what can I do? What am I doing? Like, I can't take my usual nanny with me. Where can we find somewhere? Can we get them visas? All of that kind of thing. So it's a really tricky situation, and there are so many different problems that I think none of us even considered. We obviously all knew that Brexit was going to have a huge impact for our industry, but it's because the details are so unclear still, we don't there are always new things kind of popping up to surprise us, which is great. I mean, you talk about lobbying the government. It seems to have taken such a long time to even get to the stage that we're at, and obviously COVID has kind of in a way, perhaps, helped us, that, we're not all immediately, trying to get on a plane to do jump-ins, which just seem completely impossible now. But it's, you sort of think with this time that they could have perhaps sorted it out a bit better. So yeah, it's not a happy state of affairs at the minute, really.
Thank you, Anna. Now let's turn to Ed, who is actually in Belgium at the moment, so experiencing the visa work permit issue as we speak in real time. So over to Ed.
I think I'm here as the lucky candidate who did get his visa, but yeah. So I had a contract at La Monnaie, the Royal Opera House in Belgium, and it's a standard opera contract, so it's about 8 weeks. They then lost another singer from the preceding production, and this house know me very well, so they said, well, we'd love Ed to come and do this role for us. However, this put me over the 90-day limit. So having gone over the 90-day limit, I had to apply for a visa. And this is, I think I'm one of the first Certainly, I couldn't find any other musicians who've had to apply to Belgium for a visa, and it turns out a work permit since Brexit. So the process, it's not as Byzantine as some of the other places, but I mean, I got a little list. So I needed my police certificate, which is a certificate of good conduct, which then had to be sent, which took 10 days. And then I needed another 10 days to get that legalized. There is a medical certificate to prove that you don't have any transmittable diseases, which you have to get from a very specific doctor who has been accredited by the Belgian government within London. That can range between £125 and £325. The visa itself is £180. The professional card, which I then learned I also had to have, was another £140. There was a ministry contribution, which was nearly €400. Once I got here, I had to create another appointment to go and pick up my professional card, which cost me another €90. Literally at every turn, I've been shelling out, and I'm at about £1,200 now. The truth is that, I mean, you know, I'm very fortunate. I recognize how fortunate I am to be working in Europe, and you know, I'm having to absorb those costs, but to do these jobs, it's worth it. The problem was that in order to get that stuff done, it took 7 weeks, and that was with my agency working very hard. I mean, 2-3 hours a day, 5 days a week on just my case. Also, the house here, La Monnaie, were fantastically helpful, but they had 2 people in their HR department investigating, well, you need this form, what does this mean, what, you know, they've not had to get these forms before. And of course myself, and as Ben pointed out, you still have to turn up. What's going to be, and Anna said that you know, COVID is covering some of this, and that's probably a good thing, because what I can tell you is that the systems are not in place for the kinds of traffic which are going to be passing through these systems after COVID, not on the British side and not on the Belgian side. They're just not in place. So we're just going to have logjams. We had to get La Monnaie to get in touch with the consulate in order to expedite my visa. Otherwise, even with 7 weeks to get it organised, it wouldn't have been possible. I started here on the 20th of March, so this was all in the middle of February when I was offered this second contract. So the experience is just, and the experience having got here of knowing that you're, you know, somewhere where, as Ben said, you know, you used to jump on the EasyJet or on the Eurostar and you were welcome, and you're still welcome here, but you're still being advised to carry papers with you wherever you go in order to work. You're having to go to, I mean, Belgium is quite a complex place, and you know, you have to go and register with this municipality, and you have to go and register with that office. And my issue is, this wouldn't have been possible if I had been working out of the country. I simply wouldn't have been able to do it. And for anybody without the kind of backing that I have very fortunately had with a fantastic agency and all of the help from the house here, who have been brilliant, it simply wouldn't have happened. There simply wasn't the way of finding out the information. There simply wasn't the way of getting everything done in time. And if you had financial restraints upon you as well, if you were not fortunate like I am, then it just won't happen. And what will happen is that places like La Monnaie will go, well, yes, we really love that singer, we'll get them in, but no, if it's going to go over 90 days, it doesn't make sense for us to employ them for over 90 days. And I know that sounds kind of fatalistic, but it just doesn't. I don't blame them. Why would they get their HR departments endlessly checking and filling in documents and signing things and giving, I mean, when they can have somebody from France or Ireland or Denmark or Germany or Spain or Italy or 27 other countries, why would they offer that to us when it's so complex? Anyway, I've probably gone over my 5 minutes, sorry.
Not at all, Ed. And I think also, I think Anna mentioned jump-ins. So they're just virtually impossible, aren't they now?
Well, I mean, again, sorry, Anna, I think, would you agree that if there's a jump in and you've got time on your 90 days and it's in one of the countries where you don't need a visa, we can probably still just about do it. But if it's Spain, that's not going to happen. If it's, I don't, Andy will be able to tell us about, I don't know about Italy, for instance, or the Norwegian countries. You know, it's just, with these kind of timeframes to get permission to work, we're not going to be offered those things. Sorry, Anna.
No, I mean,
well, let's just move on to Andy first, though, if that's okay. I mean, I think one of the things that is really very frustrating is that government doesn't seem to understand the nature of being a musician, and that musicians are global. That's what they are. So, Andy, just going to you, what are your observations of where we currently are?
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you to Ben, Anna, and Ed for your stories. It's very moving, and thank you, Deborah, for all your efforts to try and get the government to see sense. I know you continuing to put an enormous amount of work into it, and have given them the materials to change it and get everything sorted out. And having read the trade agreement, or having had a go at it at Christmas like you did, it doesn't give anything for musicians, but on the other hand, there's lots of other sectors it kind of doesn't give anything to as well. But it does have the provision for renegotiation. I noticed that very clearly, and it does say that it's subject, it can be renegotiated. Our understanding is that my company, Viva La Visa, we provide visa help on visa and work permit applications, primarily to the music industry, but also to the related to the fashion industry and events industries as well. Obviously, in terms of Europe, our experience in Europe before Brexit was limited to bringing over international acts and American acts who didn't need the American acts. Our experience, they didn't need anything for Europe, and the international acts needed a Schengen visa that got them into the whole of Europe. And it's pretty straightforward. Everywhere was pretty straightforward. The only place that used to need a work permit or anything was France. Everywhere else don't need anything. Never a single problem. Our view is, it seems that since Brexit, a lot of the EU countries have decided that they're going to dust off some regulations that have been sitting on their statute books for many years that they haven't really applied in our cases. Although I've heard of individual cases in the past where they have, but as a general rule, and as I was in the pre-broadcast discussion, we were just talking about how the wording of the regulations, because like Deborah mentioned, that although there's for visa, people that need a visa to enter the EU, there's a pan-EU visa, the Schengen visa, but every one of the countries underneath that has its own regulations regarding entry for work, and they're all different, and they're all couched in varying degrees of vagueness, shall we say. And some of them, for instance, France is good, and that's pretty clear, and it has that the 90-day allowance for virtually all kinds of creative activity, so you can go in there and do more or less anything in France for up to 90 days. On the other hand, some of the other ones, for instance, Denmark, doesn't. Denmark mentions noteworthy performances, which they've clarified to us as something. If it's someone whose name's on the marquee outside the venue selling tickets, that's noteworthy. So we've got a question. We've got a live stream to do for a TV company, and they're doing a live stream for a well-known toy manufacturer in Denmark. We're not allowed to mention who, and we're trying to get an opinion from them whether that qualifies as a noteworthy event or not. Well, we don't know. So there's a lot of obscurity in the wording, but and also what we're finding is that I concur with a few people saying, Ben and Ed saying that dealing with consulates is difficult. They do not communicate. They don't. It's not Amazon. There's no customer services. But we're working to what was happening. We are over the last 2 or 3 months. We're kind of getting there, and we're building up contacts with individual consulates. Like Spain was mentioned before as being a particularly difficult case. It's difficult, but at least it's clear. In the Spanish situation is clear. You need a visa to work there. But the varying subcategories of visa, which one you need, are not clearly presented. And also each Spanish consulate's website is different and has different information, some of it actually conflicting. But we've now found a contact in the Spanish consulate in Manchester who has helped us out and has clarified quite a lot of, clarified the various visas that are needed for people, particular people's activities, because we deal with musicians, but then musicians are not all the same. Some are employed by a local company, some are self-employed, but they've given us the kind of the lowdown on the correct ones to apply for. And we've seen contradictory information though in the past from the Spanish government and from the Spanish consulate, but we're kind of getting there. And I know it's a horrible situation, but I think that it does remain that we are managing to get people into most countries, well, into every country that we've been asked for, touching wood, frantically here so far. The difficulty is, the one that is a difficulty in which we are managing to overcome is the 90-day rule. The 90-day, I'm sure you've come across it, and it was mentioned by Ed, that you're allowed to spend visa-free in the Schengen area. You're allowed to spend up to 90 days in 180 days. And this kind of period seems entirely arbitrary, but apparently it's something enshrined in the original Schengen agreement. Someone must have thought it was a good idea, and apparently they are very hot on this. We've heard from the end of March, we've heard a couple of people there are people who've gone into the EU at the beginning of January and stayed there until their 90 days were up, and they've had comments from border people saying, watch out, your 90 days are up, you're not going to be able to come back in. So we know that they are policing that. The 90-day visa, so what's required is for any stay over 90 days, a period of work of over 90 days, or to be in the EU after your 90 days is up, you need a long stay visa for a particular country. And unfortunately, there are no such thing as a long stay visa for the whole of the EU. It's country by country. But your time spent, if you're on a long stay visa, your time on that long stay visa in that country doesn't count against your 90, 180 day clock. And we're finding in terms of the most straightforward ones to get, and in fact, what we've been using a lot is the French one, the French talent passport we've got for quite a few clients. And that gives them freedom to operate in France. It can be valid for up to 4 years. And it gives you freedom to work for whoever you wish. And it's based on the French government wanting people who can contribute to French culture. It's quite a broadly drawn thing, although the application process is a wee bit complicated. And it's further complicated by the fact that the French government's agency that deals with the first part of the application, not the approval or denying of it, can be a bit difficult, frankly. Some of them, they seem to have got a couple of rogue agents there. So broadly speaking, it is difficult, but we're getting there. And every week that goes past, we're getting another country that seems to be, oh yes, we know what's happening there. We've still got somewhere we don't, but some of the more obscure countries. And I think it's difficult, I know, for self-employed musicians because who don't have the resources that say Ed's organisation have. And we know, and that's why Deborah and the ISM have organised the service that they provide, that you can get in contact with us and you can have up to half an hour consultation, and we'll try and help you. And I must admit, it's been going very well. And I know that the ISM, we do get some very, very good, very interesting queries from the membership there. But in terms of, I know that Deborah in the brief to this, so that's how it is in Europe. Difficult, but get it. If you have a problem, please get in touch with us, and we'll do our very best to help you. I think one of the other things is that, as Ben mentioned, the difficulty of wanting to do things at short notice. That is a problem. And while we will work, if we're working with us, we'll do our very best to get things done in time. In the past, in our history of our company, there have been times when we've been worked outside the rules, shall we say. We've done things like a band from Jamaica and the US, managing them to get them into Portugal without any visas at all, and managing them to get them on a plane and by calls between the promoter and myself and the Portuguese immigration department, managed to get them in. So things can be done. Things can be done. I know the bureaucracy is sometimes things like a brick wall, but it is operated by people. And if you can get through to them often those people are sympathetic, although in the EU, maybe not quite so much at the moment to the UK. But generally, you know, we found that there are some cool people in there, like our person we found in Manchester in the Spanish, who do actively want to have, you know, keep culture international. They do want to have the cultural movement around the world. So they're not kind of all against us, you know, not completely. And, you know, and again, going back to, Deborah asked me to mention, I don't know how I am for time. I'm a call for
just one more minute.
Oh, okay. Deborah, you know, we also deal with the rest of the world, and it's not just Europe that's a problem at the moment. The rest of the world, one of the major areas we deal with is the US, and which is particularly difficult, although we are managing to get people in there, but there's quite a blockage in terms of visa issuance, but it's getting there. And I remember talking again, we think that the US government is totally against the culture. I remember talking to a head of a port at JFK a few years ago, who said to me, you know, we should be helping you guys. We should be welcoming you with open arms, not trying to make it difficult for you. And that was his attitude. But sometimes it doesn't get through to the government. But I think you've got to, you know, it won't kill it. I think we'll all, you know, it's not going to, you know, without lapsing into total cliche, I think it's not going to kill international music, but it's having a good try. But I think, you know, we are here to help you if you need us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andy. So obviously, Andy has the kind of view across the world, which is very useful, and years of experience of helping musicians get into some quite tricky countries like the US. So let's go to some questions. We've got about 10 minutes for questions before we go to the next session. So just having a look at my first question, which is as follows. Heartbreaking to hear these stories. I'm due to tour to France and Germany in 2022 with my chamber group. What can we do as touring musicians to wake up the government and get this fixed ASAP? Very good question. I think it is writing to your local MP and letting him or her know what's going on. I think it's really important we have to tell our MPs how terrible this is at the moment and how this is harming the UK's reputation, as well as individual livelihoods. I think also if you have got personal testimony, please do share it with myself at the ISM, because something the government keeps saying is, well, where's your evidence? Where is your evidence that there's any problem at all? And therefore, we do need personal stories desperately so we can share. Now, we know that's difficult because of COVID, but if you've got anything that you can share by way of, it's now going to cost me X, Y, or Z, and it's all this bureaucracy, blah, 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 then share it with us. And we, in turn, will share it with the government, and in particular, DCMS, but also Boris Johnson, because actually this does not get sorted out without the Prime Minister and Lord Frost returning to the negotiations with the EU and putting in place the visa waiver agreement and sorting out work permits. So talk to us, give us your personal stories, and we will then share those with government. Next question.
Sorry, Deborah, can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
I found specifically with social media, we sometimes think we're in this little echo chamber of constantly having these conversations with the same people constantly round and round. I found a lot of things that you can do is talk to your family or talk to friends that aren't in your industry, make them aware of this situation as well, because it can sometimes feel in Twitter sphere and Facebook, you're having the same conversations with the same people and you feel like you're doing a lot of work or a lot of the energy is all there, but it's still coming back at you. It's like talking to a mirror sometimes. Have those conversations and make people aware of these stories, as Deborah's saying. If you've got these personal experiences with other people outside this industry, make sure they know that this is happening as well. make them aware of the cultural impact, that if it doesn't happen, we lose a lot of culture, we lose a lot of what we pride ourselves on as a nation. I mean, we had a conversation about how our culture isn't as big as we think it is, but we will lose it. Have those conversations with people that aren't in your industry, make them know about it.
And I think just adding on to what Ben said there is, when you've had a particularly ghastly experience, tweet directly at Oliver Dowden and Caroline Dinage, okay? So make sure you're sharing on Twitter your experiences with government ministers and also Boris Johnson. Let them know your pain. Okay, on to the next question. So this sounds really technical, so I'm going to hand it straight to Andy. I work for a UK band. All 3 band members are UK citizens, but one of them is now living in the USA as US resident green card holder. Would the US resident need to comply with USA or UK entry requirements to the EU?
Well, they're the same. It depends if the person, the US and UK are both third country nationals to the EU, meaning that neither of them require visas to enter, and they have the same requirement to fulfil the work permit regulations in each country, although they seem to have been applied rather less rigorously to the US people in the past. But if in terms of COVID regulations, if they're traveling from the UK, then they're subject to UK regulations. If they're traveling from the US, then it's US regulations. But it's the country of where they're traveling from.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the important thing, is that UK citizens are now the same as US. We're third-party nationals, so we're all treated the same, although I think the border guards are more officious to UK nationals than to US nationals at the moment. Depending on where you're going, you may need a visa as well as a work permit. So again, go to our website or pick up the phone to Andy and you will see, hopefully, clarity in relation to visas and work permits, because it is unbelievably complicated. I've got loads of questions coming in and I'm conscious we've only got 6 more minutes. We're obviously going to have to do a long session on this as part of our professional development. Next question, how does the 90-day limit apply to British citizens already resident in the EU? I think that's another one for Andy.
If you've got EU residency, it doesn't apply. So if you've got, depending on what state, if you were in the EU before Brexit and you've got your EU residency application in process, depending on, then it doesn't apply to you. It only applies to you if you're entering the EU after Brexit.
Right.
Or don't have any residency going on.
Gosh, this is a bit like Mastermind, isn't it? It's really complicated.
Yeah.
Oh dear me. Oh gosh, they're really flooding through. Sorry. I've got another one, which probably is another one for Andy, or possibly for Ed and Anna, because you're both opera singers. I'm an opera singer and I am petrified that I won't get these last minute gigs. I've already had offers withdrawn. Even when it's sorted, how can we regain the trust with European houses? That is such a good question. I'm going to go to Ed first, actually.
Well, I mean, I think we have to. My experience with the houses is they are still keen to employ us. They haven't changed their minds. They haven't, they haven't said, oh well, we hate the Brits now, we're not going to have them. We have a good reputation. We have good support within the houses. I mean, you only need to look at the Peter Grimes that they're doing in Madrid to see that's a full British cast, which they knew was going to be happening after Brexit. So. But when it comes to the short-term gigs, ultimately, I think for most of the time, I believe, and I think Anna will probably agree, that we, as long as we have our 90-day limit and it's somewhere where you can apply the 90-day limit, so basically not Spain, it seems to me, and Andy could clarify that, but you'll still be able to go. The problem just arises when you've done a long contract, as I have found with this, where you just go over by, say, 15 days, and then suddenly it does become I'm afraid it just does become a bit of a train wreck, because you just have to come home for 3 months. If you can't get those, and you just, unless we get some system whereby we can work as much as we can, I think we just have to trust that we keep producing good art, we keep producing good performers, and that those good performers will be wanted. Anna, I don't know if you have any.
Anna, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Ed. I mean, I think it's as I said previously, I mean, it's slightly easier for more established artists at the minute. I think if you're coming out of college or sort of new to the industry, and this doesn't just apply to opera, obviously, then it's going to be much harder, because obviously, there are people that have made their names, there are companies that you build relationships with, and fingers crossed they remain. As Ed says, it's not like suddenly they hate us all, although you could, understand if they did. But I mean, I think it's tricky moving forward. I do hope, in a way, that once the pandemic is eased slightly, there are people in the sort of top positions in this country, as cultural institutions, that do have the ear of Boris Johnson, and we really need them to be fighting our corner, and letting him know that this is actually, this is going to affect the UK market as a whole, and get these issues sorted. As Ed says, there isn't actually much we can do until we get those things in place.
I would agree with that. And one of the things that Ed was saying was about the shortage of work in the UK by comparison to, say, Germany. Do you just want to pick up that point, Ed, in relation to the number of houses in the UK by comparison to Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly conscious. We do have two opera singers on this panel, so it's and I know that there's such a huge variation of music going on. But if you do I think our government are labouring under the misapprehension that there's a great wealth of opportunity to make money in the music industry in the UK. And if you compare, even in my background, if you compare opera houses, we have 4, I think, well, one maybe you could say 5, but they don't actually do a full season. We have 4 houses doing full seasons. And in Germany, they have between 40 and 50, depending upon how you determine it. So there's 10 times as much opera, at least 10 times, and that's not including all the festivals happening in Germany every year as there is in the UK. So if the government aren't interested in reciprocal arrangements because they think everybody's going to come here and take all this lovely work, the truth is the only people who are suffering by putting those barriers in place are British artists who want to work elsewhere, because there is so much more work beyond our shores available, certainly within the classical music industry. I can't speak for pop, but this is a real issue, because we produce a lot of fantastic talent, but we've only been able to keep producing that talent because it's had somewhere to go. And if there isn't the work happening in the UK, our budgets are being slashed. The culture budget is so small. The culture budget in the UK is so small that it fits within the margin of error for the rest of the budget. So that is the kind of money that's being put into the arts anyway. So if we can't travel, it's just, yeah, there we go. What can I say?
Right. Well, we have run out of time, unfortunately, but I think what this shows is that we need to do a full-length seminar. ISM will put on a full-length seminar covering these issues again. Do keep watching the ISM website, where we put up-to-date guidance as soon as we know anything from government, but often it is unbelievably unclear. So we're doing our best all the time to try and get clarity. Do go via the ISM frontline staff and talk to Andy Corrigan at Viva La Visa if you are totally bemused by what's going on. Use social media and direct your concerns directly at your MP, at the DCMS ministers, Boris Johnson, and also Lord Frost if he has a social media account. It's really important we're doing this. We have a letter going in next week to the government with over 200 signatures from arts organisations across the whole of the country, holding Boris Johnson to account in relation to what he said to the liaison committee in relation to sorting out this mess. We have to keep the pressure up. And that means all musicians keeping the pressure up. Talk to your MP, do your social media, let us know your personal stories so we can share that with the appropriate ministers. We have to push really, really hard because there is simply not enough work in the UK for the amount of talented people, musicians that we are producing at the current time. So this is about fundamental livelihoods and incomes. We have to all work really, really hard to try and get to a better place than we are currently at. So I'd just like to thank my amazing panel, Ben, Anna, Ed and Andy, and wish you all the very, very best of luck. I mean, it was so heartrending listening to your stories. ISM will do everything we possibly can to sort this mess out. So thank you so much for sharing your time. I think there are now 2 sessions, both at 12:45, one for ISM members only, where we will tell you what we've been up to over the past 12, 15 months. So please do sign in there. And if you're not an ISM member, stay on the main channel if you want to, and listen to Sam, who will be talking to you more about the ISM. So thank you so, so much for a brilliant session. I'm not sure I enjoyed it, but I think it was informative. So thank you.
Necessary.
Yes. Thank you.